Fantastic. So, welcome everybody to the second in this series of Wild Pavements workshops. I'm Amanda Tuke. If you don't know me, I'm a nature writer, I'm an urban botanist and birder, and I live in South London. So the housekeeping for this session is as follows. If you could please stay muted when we're doing writing exercises, I think that benefits everybody. But obviously, if you had any questions about what I'm suggesting you do, please pop those in the chat and I will endeavour to answer those. Also, if there are things that other people can answer, please do. I'd welcome that. I have enabled the live transcription, so if you'd find that useful, you should be able to access that through the menu. And if you would find it I'd certainly find it helpful if your name appeared in a way that you'd like to be called for when we do the discussion at the end of the session. So you can, if you right click on your image, you can change how your name appears. So that's the housekeeping. What about the plan for tonight's workshop? Well, much like the first one, the plan for the hour is to do 3 writing exercises leading to a 50-word piece of thumbnail nature writing. We're going to look at some readings of nature writing relating to the workshop theme. I'm going to try an aspect of creating writing on you to think about as you rework, edit and polish your writing. And then at the end of the session, we'll have an opportunity for those who'd like to share what you've written or to just share any experiences you've had during the workshop that you'd good or bad. So that's up to you. Okay, so with no further ado, let's do the warm-up exercise. So looking up, which is the theme of this workshop, is all about a different perspective and looking in a different direction. So this might sound a little strange, but what I'm going to ask you to do is to take a different perspective where you are currently at the moment. I would like you to look up from where you're sitting and then basically write a list of what you can see around and above you. So everything from the macro, so in my case there's a vent above me, to the micro. I can see lots of spiders' webs, because that rather reflects on my housekeeping, I think, and or the tangible to the ephemeral. So so anything you can see above you. You've got about 5 minutes to do this, and the idea is to just get you warmed up in terms of getting words down on paper or screen. So I'll give you a 1-minute warning as we get close to the end of the 5 minutes. There's no right or wrong with this. Over to you. You have a minute left. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. So you might be thinking, well, I don't know what that's got to do with nature writing, but obviously one of the things that all writers experience is that fear of the blank sheet of paper. And it's useful to have a kind of set of tools that you can use to get over that. This is one of them, and I'm going to try lots of others on you throughout these workshops. But this is one way of doing it. Take a look at something completely differently, and that's also something that can be really useful in nature writing. We tend to look at things in a similar way every time we, and the way people describe birds or flowers. Flowers, you're normally looking down on them. Birds, you're often looking up at them. So there's something to be said for taking that different perspective. So that was a way of pushing you to do that. But also that the idea of the macro to micro, which we have talked about at previous workshops, is something that's really useful to think about as well. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to share with you some pieces of writing that relate to the theme. So I'm going to read a few of them. Vanessa has very kindly agreed to read a couple of them too. But yeah, so I've deliberately picked 5 things that are completely different. So from the very poetic to the more prosaic to the sort of factual. But what they all have in common is something about looking up and different perspectives. So I hope you enjoy them. So the first one is from Lily K. Bright, who's a poet who lives quite near me in South London. Lily has a very interesting take on different aspects of nature, and I particularly love this poem she wrote about swifts. Swifts, sonar slicing pierces ears, oil-slicked dolphins, scythe circuitous, silver streaks sky, precise lines, an architect's drawing, all sleek, crisp and clear and clean, no bleed, no smudge. Dozen, distanced, get further away, swift spirals, studding skies, unsynchronized together, still, never still. What I love about that piece, particularly, is that expression, or the phrase crisp and clear and clean, no bleed, no smudge. To me, that just absolutely captures what swifts look like. They are so crisp and clear and clean. You get that real sense in that poem of standing alongside Lily while she's looking at swifts, which is a wonderful thing to achieve in nature writing, if you can do that. So very poetic. And now for something completely different from David Lindo in his book, Urban Birder. I was spoilt for choice when I was looking through his book for ideas to use, and he does talk a lot about looking up in urban areas, so it seems very appropriate to use a section of this. While looking for a parking place, I became aware of some gulls standing on a streetlight opposite a halal butcher's a little further down the busy high road. As I parked, I could see through the sunroof that there were 6 in total. 5 were familiar black-headed gulls, but the end bird looked distinctly different. It was slightly larger, with a stouter reddish bill, longer legs, a dark smudge over its eye, and pure white wingtips. It was a Mediterranean gull in the middle of urban London. So I love that sense of the wonder of finding something a bit special, like a Mediterranean gull. I mean, they're not rare, but certainly in London it would be an unusual bird to find. But they're also really easily overlooked because in their winter plumage they could very easily be confused for black-headed gulls. So definitely something to do a double take. If you look at gulls, which might look boring, there's always something to be said for looking a little bit more closely and to see if you find something unusual. So that's a little bit more prosaic, but somehow without being flowery, he's managed to kind of capture his excitement of finding something special on a London street. The next one is by Rachel Hill, who was one of the workshop participants for a workshop that I did in Epsom recently. And at the start of the workshop, Rachel was saying that she hadn't written, I think, anything creative since she'd been at school, so she was feeling very nervous. And then she produced this. I approached the tree, a fire-tipped dart of doubt. For me, old school, hands-on learning. For them, more CGI and VR. Boredom and ensuing carnage? Look, an ant highway. Let me see. A murmuration among my wingless fledglings, all paper and crayons. My hand meets bark. I am rerouted. So quite extraordinary piece of writing. I felt that she produced very quickly in the workshop and then tidied up after the workshop. But it has that lovely sort of introduction of the personal with her family. In fact, her daughter did the workshop with us as well. And that excitement of seeing something like ants in a tree and how magical things like that are. So while if you're thinking about looking up at nature, it's tempting to think birds, but actually it doesn't have to be. So that's something to be said for that. I'm going to pass over to Vanessa now for the last two.
So this is Miriam Darlington in Owl Sense. Then suddenly a flicker on a branch, a scuttle of tiny talons, and he was there. The local meow, pig meow, leapt into our space, and our hearts leapt with him. I wanted to shout with delight. So perfect and so improbable this tiny owl. Perched with concentrated outrage on a branch above our heads, ignoring us, he had presented himself to investigate the call of the perceived intruder. His head spun around, searching. I think that's really lovely. Just the way you're getting the bird's perspective of the human. I think that's really nice. And then Amanda, our very own Amanda. On the Taff embankment, I step back into the cool shade, pulled under two limes, so that parents and children can chatter past on their way to school. Looking up into the nearest tree, I see glossy green poddy ferns growing from a darkened cleft between branches 3 meters up, and in the center, an adventurous tuft of wheat, swelling fruit. I really love the detail of that, Amanda. I think that's really good, really tactile as well. I think that's really lovely.
Thank you. So, and part of the motivation was obviously to put some plants into here, which I'm always trying to insert plants into things. But what was fascinating was as I walked along the Taff, I kept seeing things growing up in trees. It was like kind of mini rainforest with that sort of very damp and quite warm kind of sort of microclimate, which obviously suited plants growing on the tree bark. And just to go back to the Miriam Darlington, if you don't know Miriam Darlington, so this is, I think, was her second book. Otter Country I read first before Owl Sense, so I think they came in that order. She's an amazing writer. She has that sort of she must be an obsessional person, I think is the only way of describing it, and not in a negative way. So she becomes obsessed about otters and chases around the country looking for otters, and then seems to shortly afterwards become obsessed with owls, so does the sort of same thing. But she writes in a way that's, you just get caught up in it. And I had to, particularly after the otters, I love otters anyway, so I had to really stop myself, sort of, you know, becoming involved in that and starting to chase around looking for otters too. But maybe one day later I shall do that. But yeah, so, and just a little section of the book there, but it's a, if you don't know her writing, I'd really encourage you to read some. I think you really enjoy it. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second exercise. So as a pre-workshop activity, what I asked you to do was to spend some time looking up at nature, ideally in an urban environment, but that's, you know, I appreciate for some of you that might have been difficult. It could also have been through a window, and I know for some of you that might have been what you were able to do. If for any reason you didn't get a chance to do the pre-workshop activity, that doesn't matter at all. Either write from a memory of looking up at nature, or find a picture of nature which would apply above, you know, as looking up, or even write something fictional. It's entirely up to you. The important thing is to get involved in that looking up experience. But what I'd like you to do for this second exercise is to not overthink the activity, but simply get down a description of your experience. So at this point, you're not trying to write a clever piece of nature writing or something particularly sharp or unusual or witty. It's simply about getting the content down without editing as you go along. So you've got about 10 minutes to do this, and then once again I'll give you a minute warning when you get close to the 10 minutes. Okay, and as I said, any questions, pop them in the chat. Keep an eye on that. So you have a minute left. Time's up, I'm afraid. But I'm anticipating that most of you will have written considerably more than 50 words, which is exactly as it should be, because then you're ready for the final exercise, which will be all about pruning and editing. But before we do that, something to think about while you're editing. As writers, I'm sure I'm not unique in being someone who will often start a piece of writing in this, in the same sort of order, the same approach. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to reorder your writing. So in this case, so it starts with a bang. So a lot of nature writing will build to a climax, or what's called a reveal, which is basically a kind of shorthand for explaining what you're looking at the end of your piece of writing and keeping the reader guessing till then. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to try flipping around your writing and grabbing your reader's attention right from the start. So there's lots of different ways of doing that, and you can have some fun with it. If you do absolutely hate the idea, then that's fine. I can't, I'm not going to force anybody to do something they don't want to do. So, but it's a nice, a sort of nice conscious way of taking a different approach, and perhaps one that is less usual. And the other way of thinking about it is, if you think about some of the most famous sentences in novels, for example, will often be the first sentence of the first chapter. So whether it's last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again, or it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, people don't tend to remember the line that was halfway through chapter 3, or even the final sentence of the novel. I don't know, if I asked you to tell me final sentences of novels, it'd be interesting to know how many people could do that. So there's something to be said for getting in there right at the start, grabbing the reader's attention and holding it throughout the piece. So just as an example, I've got a before and after here. So I'm not suggesting that one of them's better than the other necessarily, but they're clearly different. So the before reads like this: I hunt carefully around the foot of each oak, where the thin soil has potential. Skirting the spoil, near a tiny hole, is the lushly hairy insect with a marmalade abdomen and rich amber thorax. She's a beauty, a tawny mining bee. So the classic trope of nature writing, which is you reveal what you're looking at the end of the piece. But this could be completely different. What about, yes, 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 as I fling myself onto the ground at the foot of an oak. This is passion, but possibly not the kind you're now imagining. A tiny, lushly hairy, tawny mining bee skirts the spoil with marmalade abdomen and rich amber thorax. True love. So yeah, having a bit of fun, playing with the reader's perceptions. But yeah, it's perhaps not what they're expecting, and not how they're expecting the piece of writing to start. So as I said, there's lots of different approaches to how you might grab the attention. And I've seen some of the writing that the workshop participants did last night, and they've taken a whole load of different approaches to grabbing the reader's attention. So one of the things I'd like you to think about while you edit your writing down to the 50 words, or towards the 50 words at least, is about that approach. At the very least, be conscious of how you are ordering your writing, what you're putting where in the piece. I mean, usually a 50-word piece it's not going to be any more than probably 4 sentences, and possibly even only 3. So that gives you lots of room to play around with your ideas and how you set those out in the piece. So let's do the final exercise, which it'll be no surprise that what I'm going to ask you to do is rework your exercise 2 piece into a polished piece of thumbnail nature. So maximum 50 words. I think everybody here has done the workshop before, so maximum 50 words. If you want a title, the title must be included in the 50 words. I still always get submissions where it isn't, and it just means I have to leave the title off. So if you want a title to stay there, it must be within the 50 words. The theme is looking up, and as I said, be conscious of grabbing your reader's attention at the outset in whatever way you choose. So you're going to have about 15 minutes for this, and it'll be fun to hear perhaps some of the pieces at the end of the session. So over to you. You've got a minute left. It's hard to believe 15 minutes can go by that fast, but it has. So I'm going to pull you out of where you are, and have no fear. You'll be able to finish this off after the session. But before we have the opportunity for sharing, I just wanted to have a bit of a recap of what we've been doing this evening. So, tips for compelling nature writing. If you're struggling to start writing, a suggestion is to try and not overthink your first draft and just get the content down. And that's very much the approach that I take whenever I'm writing features, because I find I've quite often done bits of research, chatted to people, have a few vague ideas of how it might fit together, but not really clear at that point. So what I tend to do is to just get that material down on a page with whatever kind of first-hand experiences of nature I want to use. And once it's down there, then I start playing around with it and thinking about how to link it together. So that's just a way of approaching writing. But if you do get stuck at the beginning, that's just an approach that you could try taking. In terms of the edit, what I've suggested to you is to think about the ordering of the material. So, for example, reordering your writing so you grab the reader's attention at the outset. And I'm sure there's other possibilities for ordering that you could think of. So I suppose the most important thing is that ideally the way that you've ordered your writing shouldn't be an accident. It should be a conscious decision. You've thought about it and you've worked out the best way of ordering for the topic that you're talking about, and to get the maximum sort of value from your content. But yeah, so one way is to grab the reader's attention at the start. And then finally, I would really encourage you to spend proportionately a third of your time writing and 2/3 on the editing and polishing. You will never ever be criticised by an editor for being absolutely meticulous and professional in terms of the text that you send to them. So whatever, or whoever it is who's looking at your writing. So it should really be that way around. And in terms of editing and publishing, it's always a good idea to have a look at it the next day or a couple of days later before you do submit. So certainly build that into your writing time, because you just suddenly, something that seemed possible the day that you first started editing it seems achievable with a fresh pair of eyes. And so following this workshop, please do give your 50 words, and yes, it's 50 words maximum, up to 50 words angular, including the title if there is one. So give it a final polish, and if you'd like your piece to be on the theme of looking up to be considered for inclusion in one of my online anthologies on my blog, please email it to me at that email address before midnight on Sunday, the 18th of December, so this coming Sunday. I'm planning to collate the anthology on Monday, so it would really help to have pieces before then. If you did have any relevant photos that you'd like me to include in the anthology, I'd love to see them. That would be great. Or alternatively, if you're not ready to go public with your writing or this bit of writing, please at least share it with one other person and perhaps make a I hate New Year resolutions, but perhaps make a future resolution to get your writing out into public at a later stage. So what I'm going to do now is to turn off the recording.